one. This is the mock RPR that's from the week 3 packet. So each of the legs has the 1-minute warm-up with it. So yeah, so just read all those things.
Okay, this is the RPR literary examination warm-up material. Following is 1 minute of practice dictation at 180 words per minute. This is the same voice you will hear on the actual test. Ready, begin. I am honored to be with you, the men and women on the front line of American labor. We depend on your work, we depend on your dedication and love of our nation. That is what helps fuel our economic engines in peacetime. These same qualities help us remain safe and free in times of peril. I believe from the bottom of my heart that the working men and women of this nation built America and can build a future that will once again make us first in opportunity, first in jobs, first in trade, and indeed first in the world. We should outcompete, outproduce, and outtrade any nation. There's absolutely nothing wrong with America that cannot be mended. There aren't any limits to our future if we don't put limits on our people. The real American dream is not to get rich in material comforts, but just to have the chance to succeed, particularly for our children. It is to provide the means so that every person is given a chance to climb as high as allowed. Okay, now this is the end of the practice dictation. We are now ready to begin the literary portion of the RPR examination, which is 5 minutes of dictation at 180 words per minute. Ready, begin. All of you know that we're looking at what remains of one of the deadliest tornadoes in Alabama's history, one of the most powerful tornadoes ever known in the United States. I've just come from a recovery center where I spoke with some other grieving families. I met a young man who was on his way to his wife's funeral. They were married just a year and a month. Really a very sad thing. The vice president told me about the near complete destruction, but this really is a place that has to be seen to be believed and understood. I can hardly believe what I see. I want all of you to know here in Alabama that the entire country has been affected by this disaster, by its scope, by its sweep, and the manner in which you have struggled and tried to fight through. Our country has prayed for and hoped for you and for your neighbors in Georgia. As always, I have been particularly moved by the way people in the community have pulled together and reached to their neighbors whom they knew and their neighbors whom they did not know before this terrible tragedy struck, and I thank you for that. I never cease to be amazed when I see people who have lost everything and can still express their thanks that they and their children and neighbors are still alive and they have the chance to start again. Your community has pulled together, your state has been here, and there is a duty that your fellow citizens through the country feel. The reason we have a federal emergency agency, the reason we have disaster help, the reason we do all these things is that all of us see that from time to time in America, things will happen that no region, not even one state, can handle on its own. I am pleased that federal assistance checks are already in the hands of Alabama residents who are repairing and rebuilding their homes or those who need temporary housing or medical care. I spoke to some folks today who hadn't received them yet. However, I assured them that they would be there immediately and that if they aren't, they ought to call us and let us know. I know too that today the first disaster loans to businesses went out from the Small Business Administration, about $600,000 worth to them. And today I can see we are now offering all sorts of public help funding for local governments and nonprofit groups to rebuild, restore, and repair public facilities, including schools and bridges. And I think that's quite vital. And I think it's also vital that we see that for all the courage and heroism that the just plain old resilience of the people, there are emotional and physical stresses following such a storm like this that go past the cost of the buildings blowing down and the homes blown away and the family letters and pictures that will never be seen again, even beyond the hospital costs of legs that have to be set and cuts that have to be sewn up. So we're authorizing a crisis counseling aid and training program here to give up to 9 months of local services and outreach to help people who need to be helped as they start trying to look ahead once again. Finally, I talked to a number of people today who just can't go to work right now because of what's happened, who are concerned about their law. The Department of Labor is going to provide over 3 million jobs for some jobs to aid in the cleanup and recovery. And I hope some of the people in this neighborhood who may be unemployed as a consequence of the tornado will be able to get some temporary work, helping to put their neighbors' lives and their communities back together again. Finally, let me say that our FEMA director contacted the National Council of Churches about the loss and destruction to churches here, and they have pledged to help on a national basis to assist in the effort to rebuild and repair all the churches that were damaged and destroyed here in our state as a result of this storm. Let me just close with special commendations for all the state and local crisis officials, the search and rescue teams, for all who have labored so long. The governor told me about some of the horrible human loss just within yards of where we're standing. I thank the people in our military uniforms. Many of them have been here for hours and hours and hours without relief. I know that many of these relief workers have been working more than 18 hours a day to clear debris, to cut trees, to lift telephone poles. I would like to compliment your power company for getting the power back on within 48 hours and allowing some measure of normalcy to return. I would like to thank the Salvation Army for providing the free meals and all the people that contributed food from all over America. I would like to thank the people who have provided quilts or medicine or other physical support.
Welcome to the RPR jury charge examination warm-up material. Following is 1 minute of practice dictation at 200 words per minute. This is the same voice you will hear on the actual test. Ready? Begin. Members of the jury, I will now give you the instructions on the law that you must follow in considering the facts and in reaching your verdict. When you apply these instructions, keep in mind the following 2 things. First, you must consider all the instructions and apply them to the evidence. Second, you must give equal weight to each instruction. The fact that I give them in a particular order does not mean that one is more important than the others. Take the law as I give it in these instructions and apply that law to the evidence. Consider only the facts that have been received in this trial. After you have considered the facts and these instructions, you should let your soundest reason and best judgment guide you in reaching your verdict. If any one of you has the impression that I have an opinion about the defendant's guilt or innocence, you must disregard such impression. You must decide the issues of fact solely as you view the evidence. You, ladies and gentlemen, are the sole judges of the facts, and I am the judge of the law only. The district attorney has filed a complaint in the case. This is the end of the practice dictation. We are now ready to begin the jury charge portion of the RPR examination, which is 5 minutes of dictation at 200 words per minute. Ready? Begin. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, in a prosecution for theft by false pretenses, if it is shown that the defendant practiced a fraud of a kind regarded by law as being a false pretense and with the intent to deprive one party of property, it is immaterial if he did so to get it for himself for his own needs or to attain its delivery for another person or organization or for the aid of himself. Now you are instructed that the corroboration required in order to form the crime of theft by false pretense is that of the making of the pretense. Therefore, if in this case you find that there was no corroboration of any alleged pretense or representation, you must acquit the accused of theft by false pretense or fraudulent representation. If it is shown that there was some space of time from the act of a fraudulent representation or the use of a false pretense and the time when the person did, by employing such false means, obtain the property of another, then the length of time between the two events is not of itself controlling. The question is whether the effect of the false pretense upon the mind to which it was directed continued, operated, and was relied on at the time the property in question was given over. When a false representation has been made, and the law will view it as continuing, and it will then cover any money or property received as a result thereof. And you should find that if a person named in a certain count of the information was shown any writing or a document prior to the time that he paid any money in connection with the transaction involved, and there were provisions in such document which were contrary to or inconsistent with representations which such person so seeing the document claims to have heard, then for the purpose of deciding the merit of the testimony of such witness, you may want to ask the question of whether a reasonable person would have put any faith in any such oral statements. Before you may return a verdict of guilty of theft by obtaining a property by false pretense under a said count, you must all agree on at least one false and fraudulent representation or pretense as having been made by the defendant, and if you find that he made any, that representation or pretense must be of the kind and have the effect as defined for you in these instructions. When, as in this case, a defendant is charged with having obtained property by false pretense, and it is alleged in the information that the defendant used two or more different false pretenses as a means of obtaining the property of another, it is not needed to justify a verdict of guilty that the jury find that all the alleged false pretenses were used. Proof that there was one time the defendant used a false pretense, which was a material inducement in reliance on which the complaining witness parted with his property, and proof that the other requisite elements of the alleged crime were present, are enough to sustain a conviction if that proof meets the standard needed as required by the law. To constitute the crime of theft by obtaining property by false pretense, there must be a clear fraudulent representation of an existing or past fact by one who knows it to be not true, or who makes the representation recklessly and without information justifying a belief that it is true, and it must be such as is adopted to induce the person to whom it is made to part with something of value. A mere expression of opinion or a statement of a person's thoughts about the future is not such a fraudulent representation. It is not necessary that the pretense be such as cannot be guarded against by common care, nor is it necessary that the fraudulent representation be made by words if it may reasonably be inferred from a person's acts and conduct. Proof of these four facts must be made against the defendants before he may be found guilty of the crime of theft by means of false or fraudulent representation or pretense. 1, the defendant must have been meant to defraud the one named in the information as the one against whom the crime was performed. 2, actual fraud must have been done by the defendant against that person. 3, some false representation or false pretense must have been used by or at the direction of the defendant for the purpose of perpetrating the fraud and must have been a material element in inducing the owner to part with the property. 4, the fraud must have been done, that is, the defendant by means of the fraud must have induced the owner to part with the property, the owner intending to divest himself of title, and the defendant thus must have obtained the property. In a prosecution for theft by false pretenses, if it is shown that the one being charged practiced a fraud of a kind regarded by law as being a false pretense, and with the intent to take the property of another, it is immaterial whether he did so to have property for himself or his own possession, or to accomplish its delivery to another, either for the need of that other person or for the need of himself. Welcome to the RPR testimony examination warm-up material. Following is 1 minute of practice dictation at 225 words per minute. These are the same voices you will hear on the actual test. Ready? Begin. State your name for the record, please.
My name is Sandra Fuller.
Are you employed?
Yes, I am employed.
What do you do for a living?
I teach mentally handicapped children
How long have you been doing that?
for approximately 5 years now.
Where do you reside?
I reside in Atlanta, Georgia.
Where were you living here at the time of the accident?
Yes, at the time of the accident, I had been living in Atlanta for about 7 months.
Where were you working at the time of the accident?
I was working for the city of Atlanta as a counselor at a daycare facility.
Are you married?
No,
Have you ever been married?
no, I haven't.
Do you remember when the accident occurred?
Yes, it was on September 17, 2010.
Where had you been that day?
We had taken the children over to the park for a picnic, and I was just walking home from the park.
Approximately how far was it from the park to your apartment?
I believe it was about 2.5 or 3 miles.
Had you traveled that route before the day of the accident?
Yes, I had many times.
So you were generally familiar with the vehicular traffic in this area?
Yes, the daycare center was very close to the park, and I would often walk or jog to and from work.
This is the end of the practice dictation. We are now ready to begin the testimony portion of the RPR examination, which is 5 minutes of dictation at 225 words per minute. Ready? Begin. Would you please state your full name and address for the court reporter?
My name is Cliff D. Kelly, and I live at 235 West 10th Street.
Could you tell us a little bit about your educational background?
I got through 2 years of high school.
Have you been trained for construction work, Mr. Kelly?
Just what I've done all my life.
But you have no formal training, just on-the-job training?
Just on the job, that's right.
When were you hired by Bill Richards?
I think I started working for him about 11 years ago.
When did you first learn that there was a possibility of a contract being let for this job?
When Mr. Richards got hold of me for the job,
When did he contact you?
I really don't remember.
Before you were directly involved with that contract, how long would that have been?
It would be about a week previous to that.
You're saying about a week before you actually began moving men and equipment onto the site, is that correct?
No, a few days before that, he talked to me, and then we started moving equipment on the site.
You had no discussions with him or anyone else about the job before that time?
None whatsoever.
What's your position with the company?
I am the foreman.
Do you know how many other foremen he employs?
It depends a lot on the work he does. I mean, generally, there may be a carpentry foreman or another foreman, whatever the union requires him to have.
What did Mr. Richards tell you about the nature of the job when he first discussed it with you?
We were to pull the covers and use an orange peel to take the stuff out.
Now, when you say orange peel, could you be a little more specific?
It's a bucket that closes. As you come down it, it closes the material and pulls the material out.
Would another name for that be a clam?
Yes, I guess you could call it a clam. It could be used as a clam. If you want to use another name, I believe a clam is bigger than the orange peel. The orange peel is a smaller bucket.
What technique would be used with the orange peel? Would it be suspended from a crane?
They are suspended from a crane, and then the crane has winches that operate it.
And then you lower it into the bottom of the tank, right?
Yes.
And you drag it along the bottom of the tank?
No, they pick specific spots to take out.
What sort of records did you maintain at that time?
I kept daily records of the men I had on the job, what was going on, what was in there, and things like that. I don't have the records anymore.
Do you recall who was employed on the job site? Could you name as many of them as possible?
No, I can't.
You don't remember one name among those men?
That would be kind of hard because I had a lot of transient workers. They didn't stay there very long.
What did they say? What was their reason for leaving the work?
They just wouldn't work in there, that's all.
Did they give you a more specific reason as to why they didn't want to work there?
They wouldn't work in that stuff.
Did they say it was because of the odor?
I think it was really the site more than the odor. The odor coming out of the tank really wasn't that bad. I must have used about 10 men in there altogether. I mean, there were never 10 in there at the same time.
So there was a high turnover at this job, is that correct?
Yes, sir, there sure was.
Did any of your workers complain about the odor coming from that tank?
I had one that wouldn't even get into the tank. He was a good man, and I didn't want to lose him, so I worked in there myself.
When were you informed that the technique described at first of using the orange peel would not be used?
It might have been a week or maybe less than that.
Had you begun to move men and equipment onto the site at that time?
There might have been some equipment moved, but I'm not sure about that.
Had someone made arrangements to use an orange peel or a crane?
I wouldn't know anything about that, sir.
What were you told and under what circumstances when you learned that the orange peel would not be used.
I believe Mr. Richards told me that the city would not allow the cover to be pulled off the tank. They said they had certain neighbors that wouldn't allow it.
Had you yourself heard anything directly from neighbors or other people on this matter?
No, I hadn't. This is just what we were getting through hearsay.
Who told you there had been complaints about this tank?
It was the people working for the city.
The ones who were normally at the plant?
That's right.
Did they get these complaints directly? Did they indicate that to you?
I really don't know, sir.
So now that you couldn't use the orange peel anymore, did Mr. Richards tell you what technique you would be using now?
We were supposed to pump the stuff out of the tanks and into the trucks.
What size were these pumps to be?
We started the job with a 4-inch pump, and then we got up to a 6-inch and even an 8-inch pump one time.
How many pumps did you have in use initially?
We had 2 pumps working there for a while.
Did you have any difficulty in using these pumps?
We had to give that operation up, yes.
What was the problem?
The pumps would plug up on us.
What would you do when one of them plugged up?
We would take it apart and unplug it. There is a certain area in there you can clean out, but when you do, it empties everything in the hose back onto the ground.
About how long after the start of the job did you tell Mr. Richards it was impossible to do?
I don't know. I don't remember.
Was it more than a month?
I don't think it was that much. I don't remember.
Did you suggest anything yourself about what could be done?
I think the discussion of the cover came up again, but I'm not sure.
Do you recall what finally happened in response to the problem?
It turned out we had to get a different pump.
And that is the RPR.